the billionaire doctor who rejected all until her. Winter had wrapped Seoul in its coldest embrace that evening. The streets glistened with fresh snow, and the city hummed with people rushing toward the warmth of their homes. Dr. Jaewon pushed through the hospital's glass doors, exhaustion settling into his bones after 18 hours of surgery. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went. The brilliant surgeon who built an empire from nothing, the billionaire who turned a small clinic into the most prestigious private hospital in the city. Women had thrown themselves at his feet for years. Heiresses with perfect pedigrees, actresses with magazine cover faces, fellow surgeons from influential families. He had turned them all away with the same cold response. Love is a distraction I cannot afford. His black Mercedes waited across the icy street, but as he approached it, something made him pause. A figure lay crumpled on the sidewalk, barely visible against the white ground. Jaewon's first instinct was to keep walking. Seoul had no shortage of people who made poor decisions on winter nights. But then the street lamp shifted, casting light on her face. A young black woman, her skin ashen from cold, her thin coat soaked through with melting snow. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate breaths. Jaewon cursed under his breath. He recognized the signs immediately. Hypothermia, advanced stage. Minutes away from something irreversible. Against every logical part of his brain that screamed to maintain distance, to call an ambulance and walk away, he knelt beside her. Her pulse barely registered under his fingertips. This woman would not survive the wait for emergency services. The decision came without thought. He scooped her into his arms, surprised by how fragile she felt, and carried her back through the doors he had just exited. When Ayana's eyes finally opened, the world looked wrong. Too white, too clean, too bright. She blinked against the fluorescent lights, trying to piece together her last clear memory. The walk home from her second job, the snow falling harder than the weather report had predicted, her vision swimming, her knees giving out. A voice cut through her confusion, deep and measured. You collapsed on the street. You're in my hospital. She turned her head to find a man standing near the window, his white coat pristine, his posture rigid. Everything about him radiated control, from his perfectly styled black hair to the expensive watch on his wrist. His face could have been carved from marble, beautiful in a way that felt almost dangerous. Where exactly am I? She managed, her voice hoarse. My private hospital, he replied without looking at her. You should consider yourself fortunate. Another 10 minutes and you would have been beyond saving. Ayana's throat tightened. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be a burden. You should be sorry, Jaewon said sharply. Do you have any idea how reckless you were? She looked down at her hands, fighting the sting of tears. Korea had been so much harder than she had imagined. 2 part-time jobs barely covered her tuition and rent. Some weeks she chose between textbooks and meals. Last night, she had been too exhausted to notice how badly the weather had turned, and her body had simply surrendered. I understand, she whispered. Thank you for helping me. I didn't ask you to. Jaewon finally turned to look at her properly, and something in his chest shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes held a clarity he had not expected, a quiet strength that seemed at odds with her circumstances. Her hands were rough with work, her clothes worn thin, but she met his gaze without flinching. Rest today, he said, his tone softening by a fraction. Someone will bring you the bill in the morning. The words hit her like ice water. Bill? Of course. Nothing came free, especially not in a place like this. She nodded slowly, knowing already that the number would be impossible. When the door closed behind him, Ayana stared at the ceiling and wondered if surviving last night had been worth this new nightmare. Morning arrived with a nurse carrying a clipboard and an apologetic expression. The bill made Ayana's stomach drop. It was more than 3 months of her wages combined. The nurse seemed to read the devastation on her face. Perhaps you should speak with Dr. Jaewon directly, she suggested gently. Ayana forced her shaking legs to carry her through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and money. She found him in an office that looked more like a penthouse suite, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He did not look up when she entered. "You are awake," he observed, still writing. "Yes, and I need to talk to you about the bill." "I cannot pay this." "Everyone pays," Jae-won said, his pen still moving across the page. "This is a business, not a charity." Ayana took a breath, steadying herself. "I am not asking for charity. Let me work. Whatever you need, cleaning, filing, assistance. I will pay every cent back with my labor." That made him pause. He set down his pen and studied her with those sharp, unreadable eyes. No one had ever proposed such a thing to him before. Most people either begged or made promises they had no intention of keeping. This woman stood before him, broke and desperate, yet she held on to her dignity like a lifeline. "You want to work off your debt," he said slowly, testing the words. "Yes. I do not like owing anyone anything. If you saved my life, I will repay you properly." Silence filled the space between them. Then, to his own surprise, Jae-won heard himself say, "Fine. You can start tomorrow." Ayana's eyes went wide. She bowed deeply, gratitude flooding through her. "Thank you. I promise you will not regret this." As she left, Jae-won sat motionless, staring at the door she had closed behind her. Something about this woman unsettled the perfect order of his world, and he could not decide if that feeling was warning or curiosity. Ayana's first days at the clinic tested every ounce of strength she had left. The other staff members made no effort to hide their disdain. Whispers followed her everywhere. "Who does she think she is? Why would Dr. Jae-won allow someone like her to work here? She does not belong in a place like this." Ayana kept her head down and her hands busy. She scrubbed equipment until it gleamed, organized files with meticulous care, and guided confused patients with gentle patience. And everywhere she went, she felt his eyes on her. Jae-won watched from doorways and through windows, his expression impossible to read. During lunch, one of the senior nurses, Sun-hee, cornered her in the break room. "You are not qualified to be here." "What exactly are you doing?" "Paying a debt," Ayana answered calmly. Sun-hee crossed her arms. "You will fail. People like you always do." The words stung, but Ayana refused to let them show. She had survived worse than cruel colleagues. Later that evening, as the clinic emptied out, Ayana saw Jae-won in a conference room surrounded by men in expensive suits. They listened to him with rapt attention, hanging on his every word. He commanded the room effortlessly, a king in his domain. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass, and Ayana felt something shift in the air between them. That night, walking back to her cramped apartment, she whispered to the cold air, "I will make it through this. No matter what it takes." What she did not know was that her presence had already begun to crack something deep inside the man who claimed to need no one. The weeks blurred together in a rhythm of classes and clinic work. Ayana arrived before dawn and left long after sunset. The work was exhausting, but she threw herself into it with fierce determination. The staff continued to treat her like an intruder, but she refused to let their hostility break her spirit. She smiled at patients who looked through her, bowed to colleagues who sneered at her, and cleaned up mistakes that were not her own without complaint. Jae-won saw everything. He noticed how she held doors for elderly patients, how she stayed late to help a confused family understand their paperwork, how her hands trembled from exhaustion, but never stopped moving. One evening, he found her struggling with a heavy box of medical supplies. The box slipped from her grip, and glass bottles shattered across the tile floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Be more careful," Sun-hee snapped from down the hall. "You are going to cost us more than you are worth." Ayana dropped to her knees immediately, her face burning with shame as she began gathering the broken pieces. Before anyone else could speak, Jae-won's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Enough." Everyone in the hallway froze. Jae-won rarely involved himself in staff disputes. "She works harder than anyone here," he said, his tone ice cold as his gaze swept the room. "If anyone has a complaint about her, they can bring it to my office and explain why they deserve to keep their position." Sunhee's face went pale. The other nurses suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. Ayana's hands shook as she picked up the last pieces of glass. She wanted to thank him, but when she glanced up, his expression had already returned to its usual mask of indifference. Still, something warm had bloomed in her chest, a dangerous feeling she tried desperately to ignore. One frozen night, Ayana left the clinic later than usual. The sidewalks were treacherous with black ice, and the wind cut through her worn jacket like knives. She hurried down the street, watching her footing carefully. A car came around the corner too fast, its headlights suddenly blinding her. Ayana froze like a deer, her mind going blank with panic. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders and yanked her backward just as the car roared past, close enough that she felt the rush of air against her face. She stumbled into a solid chest, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. It was Jae-won. He had been leaving at the same time and had seen the danger before she did. His grip on her arms was almost painful, his face twisted with an emotion she had never seen on him before. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" he demanded, his voice rough. "I did not see it coming," Ayana gasped, still shaking. "You never see anything coming," he muttered, but he did not let go of her. For a long moment, they stood there in the frozen night, his hands on her shoulders, their faces closer than they had ever been. Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like fear. When he finally released her, Ayana could still feel the ghost of his touch burning through her coat. By morning, rumors had spread through the clinic like wildfire. "Did you see Dr. Jae-won save that girl? Why does he care so much about her? Maybe she is using him somehow." Ayana heard every whisper. Each one felt like a small cut. She had never wanted to be a source of gossip or to make anyone think she was taking advantage of Jae-won's kindness. That evening, she gathered every ounce of courage she possessed and knocked on his office door. "Come in," his voice called. She stepped inside, keeping her eyes on the floor. "Dr. Jae-won, I wanted to thank you. For everything. For saving me that first night, for giving me this chance to work. But I need to ask you something." He looked up from his computer, one eyebrow raised. "What is it?" "Please stop protecting me in front of the others. It only makes them resent me more. I can handle their words. I just do not want to cause you trouble." Jae-won leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "You think I care about gossip? I care about what is fair. They treat you poorly because they are small-minded, not because you deserve it." Ayana swallowed hard. "I do not want to be a burden to you." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than she had ever heard it. "You are not a burden." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Ayana bowed quickly and fled before he could see the tears threatening to spill. Alone in his office, Jae-won pressed his palms against his desk and wondered what was happening to him. Why did this woman affect him so deeply when no one else ever had? The transformation happened so gradually that Jae-won almost did not notice it at first. He told himself he was simply observing a hard worker, nothing more. But then he realized his eyes searched for her without his permission. When she walked past his office carrying files, he found reasons to glance up. When she laughed at something a patient said, that rare, genuine sound, his chest would tighten in a way that felt almost painful. When she tucked a stray curl behind her ear while concentrating on paperwork, he caught himself staring. It irritated him. He was not a man who lost focus. Love had always seemed like a weakness, a liability he could not afford. Yet late at night in his empty penthouse, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt hollow, he found himself thinking about the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her studies, or how she hummed softly when she thought no one was listening. He tried to shake it off, but the thoughts persisted. For Ayana, the feelings were equally confusing. She reminded herself constantly that Jaewon was her employer, nothing more. A man from a completely different world who had shown her a moment of kindness. She had no business letting her thoughts wander in dangerous directions. But she could not help noticing everything about him. The precise way his hands moved during consultations, steady and sure. The furrow that appeared between his brows when he was worried about a patient. The unexpected gentleness in his voice when he spoke to the children in the pediatric ward. Sometimes she caught him watching her, and their eyes would meet for a heartbeat before he looked away. Each time it happened, her pulse would race, and she would have to remind herself to breathe. She could not afford feelings. Her life was already too complicated, too precarious. Yet no matter how much she tried to fight it, warmth would spread through her chest whenever she thought of him. One quiet evening, Ayana stayed late to organize the supply closet. She hummed as she worked, a melody her mother used to sing when Ayana was small. She did not know that Jaewon was walking past at that exact moment. The sound stopped him in his tracks. He stood frozen in the hallway, listening to a song he had never heard before, but that somehow felt achingly familiar. It was warm and tender, full of a kind of love he had spent his whole life avoiding. It reminded him of things he thought he did not need. Home. Belonging. Connection. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes, letting the melody wash over him. Then, before she could discover him there, he forced himself to walk away, his heart strangely unsettled. That night, Ayana dreamed of snow and dark eyes watching her from the shadows. That night, Jaewon sat alone in his apartment, unable to focus on anything except the echo of her voice singing in the empty clinic. Neither of them spoke about it. Neither of them dared to name what was growing between them, fragile as new ice, but just as undeniable. But something had shifted, and even Jaewon, who had rejected everyone, could no longer pretend he was unaffected. The snow fell heavier that week, blanketing Seoul in white silence. Inside the clinic, Jaewon felt a different kind of weight pressing down on him. He buried himself in work, performing surgeries back to back, attending endless meetings, reviewing patient files until his eyes burned. Nothing helped. Maria's presence had become impossible to ignore. One evening, he walked past the small staff lounge and saw her sitting alone at the table. Textbooks surrounded her, notes scattered everywhere, a pen clutched in her tired hand. She was studying again after a full day of work, her determination written in every line of her posture. He stood in the doorway, watching her longer than he should have. Finally, he stepped inside. "You are still here," he said. Ayana looked up, startled. "Oh, Dr. Jaewon." "Yes, I have exams next week. I need to keep studying." "You work all day," he observed, his voice harder than he intended. "When do you rest?" "When I achieve what I came here for," she answered simply. The words struck him deeper than they should have. Such simple conviction, such raw determination. Something inside his carefully constructed walls cracked a little wider. "You are not like the others," he said, almost to himself. Ayana blinked. "Not like the others." He looked away quickly, as if the words had escaped without permission. "Forget I said that." But the weight of those words hung between them, impossible to ignore. Over the following days, Jaewon found himself doing things he had never done before. Small things that he could not quite explain to himself. He left a cup of coffee on her desk one morning without a word. He corrected a nurse too sharply when she made a snide comment about Ayana's accent. He asked her one afternoon, with genuine concern, if she had eaten lunch, shocking both of them with the question. Ayana noticed every small gesture. Each one made her heart race in ways she tried desperately to suppress. She told herself not to hope, not to imagine, not to let herself feel. One evening, as they both left the clinic at the same time, the streets were quiet and covered in fresh snow. Their footsteps crunched softly in the silence. Korea gets so cold, Ayana said with a soft laugh, hugging her thin jacket tighter. Without thinking, without planning, Jaewon unwrapped the scarf from around his neck and draped it around hers. Ayana froze completely. Her heart jumped into her throat. "I cannot take this," she protested weakly. "You will get sick again," he said firmly. "Wear it." She touched the soft fabric, still warm from his body, carrying the faint scent of his cologne. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for the first time, she saw past his carefully maintained walls. There was something vulnerable in his expression, something raw and unguarded. Jaewon's heart pounded in a way he had never experienced. He opened his mouth to say something, anything to explain what he was feeling, but fear stopped the words in his throat. Instead, he turned away abruptly. "Go home safely," he said, his voice rougher than usual. Ayana stood alone in the falling snow, clutching his scarf, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. She did not know it yet, but the walls around Jaewon's heart were already crumbling. And soon, the words he thought he would never say to anyone were forming inside him, demanding to be spoken. The clinic was nearly empty that evening. Most of the staff had already left, the hallways quiet except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Only 2 people remained. Ayana, finishing the last of her administrative tasks, and Jaewon, sitting in his office pretending to review charts, but unable to focus on a single word. For hours, he had been fighting an internal war. His mind screamed at him to maintain control, to remember who he was. A self-made billionaire. A respected surgeon. A man who had built his entire identity on emotional discipline. But his heart refused to listen anymore. He stood abruptly, his decision made before his rational mind could intervene. His feet carried him down the empty hallway to where Ayana sat, her head bent over paperwork. She looked up when he entered, surprise crossing her face. "Dr. Jaewon, I was just finishing these patient files." "Leave them," he said quietly. His voice sounded different, softer and more uncertain than she had ever heard it. "Is something wrong?" Ayana asked, concerned. Jaewon moved closer, his hands clenched at his sides. He had performed countless surgeries without his hands trembling, but now, standing before her, his entire body felt unsteady. "Ayana," he began, her name sounding foreign on his lips. "I have spent my entire life keeping people at a distance. I convinced myself that I did not need anyone, that emotion was a liability." Her eyes widened. Her heart began to pound. "But since the night I found you collapsed in the snow," Jaewon continued, his voice growing stronger, "I have not been the same. You have been dismantling everything I built to protect myself. And no matter how hard I try, I cannot stop thinking about you." The room felt too small suddenly. Ayana's breath caught in her throat. "Dr. Jaewon," Jaewon took another step closer. His eyes, usually so cold and controlled, burned with something intense and frightening. "I do not know any other way to say this," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But Ayana, I think I am falling in love with you." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her entire world tilted on its axis. This was the man who had rejected countless women. The man who claimed he would never fall in love. And yet here he stood, confessing feelings she had never dared to hope for. "You cannot mean that," she whispered. "I do," Jaewon said with absolute certainty. "I have spent years healing other people while refusing to heal myself. Then you walked into my life and changed everything." Tears burned in Ayana's eyes. She did not know what to say, but deep in her heart, she knew the truth. She had been falling for him too, despite every attempt to fight it. And in that quiet clinic, with only the 2 of them present, something profound and unbreakable formed between them. The walls he had spent a lifetime building had finally shattered completely. Ayana's hands trembled so violently she had to clasp them together. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she wondered if he could hear it in the silence. "You are falling in love with me," she repeated, as if saying the words aloud might make them real. Yes, Jae-won said simply. His certainty was both terrifying and intoxicating. She laughed, a shaky, disbelieving sound. How is this possible? You are you, and I am just. Just what? He interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. Say what you are feeling, Ayana. Do not hide from me. She looked down at her worn shoes, her vision blurring with tears. Do I feel something for you? She whispered. Yes. I have felt it for weeks now, maybe longer. I told myself it was impossible, that you lived in a completely different world than mine. But every day, every moment I am near you. Her voice broke. Every moment, it grows stronger. Jae-won's breath caught. For years, he had controlled every aspect of his life with an iron will, but now he felt something bigger than control, bigger than fear. He felt relief. He stepped closer until he could see the tears glistening on her lashes. Ayana, he said softly, almost reverently. You do not have to fight it anymore. Neither of us does. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. What will people say? I have nothing. No money, no connections. Your world and mine. I do not care what anyone says, Jae-won said, his jaw tightening with determination. Let them talk. I choose you. That is all that matters. And with those words, something shifted irrevocably between them. What had been fragile and uncertain became solid and real. The days that followed felt different. Their connection was no longer hidden in stolen glances and unspoken words. It existed openly, quietly, but undeniably. Jae-won stopped pretending to be indifferent around her. He let small smiles appear when she entered a room. He asked about her courses, her family back home, her dreams for the future. Ayana, in turn, felt herself opening in ways she had not known were possible. She told him about growing up in Lagos, about her mother's songs and her father's dreams for her education. She spoke about the loneliness of being alone in a foreign country and the constant weight of survival. She laughed more freely around him. She felt truly seen for the first time since arriving in Korea. At the clinic, their bond expressed itself in small gestures. He brought her food when she forgot to eat. She reminded him to rest when he pushed himself too hard. He defended her fiercely when colleagues questioned her presence. She calmed his temper when difficult meetings left him frustrated. It was not a fairy tale romance. It was not loud or dramatic. But it was real and solid and growing stronger every day. Ayana realized something that both scared and warmed her. She was not just falling anymore. She had already fallen completely. And Jae-won, the man who had rejected everyone, knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found the one person he could never let go of. The change in their relationship did not go unnoticed. People began to see the way Jae-won's expression softened when Ayana was nearby. The way she moved through the clinic with quiet confidence, no longer just the poor foreign student working off a debt. The way their eyes met across crowded rooms, communicating in a language only they understood. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some people were curious. Others were cruel. And eventually, the gossip reached the ears of Jae-won's family. His father, a powerful businessman who had built his own empire, summoned him to dinner one evening. The conversation started cordially but quickly turned cold. This woman you have been seeing, his father said, setting down his chopsticks with deliberate precision. She is not suitable for you. She has no family connections, no wealth, no proper background. End this relationship immediately before you damage everything you have built. Jae-won sat in silence, memories flooding through him. Once, he would have obeyed without question. Once, power and reputation had been the only things that mattered to him. But now everything had changed. Father, he said quietly but firmly, I have rejected every woman who tried to get close to me. I built walls so high that no one could climb them. But Ayana is different. She makes me want to live, not just exist. I will not leave her. His father's face darkened with anger. Then you are choosing to throw away your position in this family. If you continue this foolishness, you are no longer my son. The words landed like blows, but Jaewon's resolve did not waver. Then I accept that, he said, standing from the table. I am sorry to disappoint you, but I will not change my mind. When Ayana heard what had happened, she wept. He found her in the clinic's break room, her face buried in her hands. You gave up your family for me, she said, her voice breaking. I cannot let you sacrifice everything. How can I live with that? Jaewon knelt beside her chair and gently took her hands in his. Look at me, he said softly. She raised her tear-stained face. I did not give up anything, he told her, his voice steady and sure. I gained everything that matters. For years, I healed broken bodies, but refused to heal my own broken heart. You did that for me, Ayana. You are my choice. You will always be my choice. She pressed her forehead against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt as she held on to him. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jaewon held someone not out of duty or obligation, but out of pure love. Weeks passed, and winter returned to Seoul with fresh snowfall. The streets glowed under the city lights, and people hurried past in their warm coats. Ayana walked beside Jaewon, their fingers intertwined. She noticed people staring. Some faces showed admiration, others showed disapproval, but she found she did not care anymore. In this moment, it was just the two of them against the world. Jaewon stopped walking suddenly and turned to face her. Snowflakes caught in his dark hair, softening his usually sharp features. The winter glow made him look almost ethereal. Ayana, he said, his voice carrying a tenderness that still surprised her every time she heard it. I once believed that love was weakness, that it would make me vulnerable and small. But you showed me the truth. Love is the greatest strength any of us can have. You are my heart, my home, my future. Tears filled Ayana's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. And you are mine, she said, her voice steady despite her emotions. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as snow fell around them like a blessing. The man who had once rejected all had finally chosen. And in the quiet, snowy streets of Seoul, love had won. Spring arrived in Seoul, bringing warmth and renewal to the city. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the streets, replacing the snow that had witnessed the beginning of their love story. Flowers opened in parks and gardens, and the air smelled sweet and hopeful. One afternoon, as Ayana and Jaewon left the clinic together, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and Jaewon's father stepped out. Ayana's heart jumped into her throat. She felt Jaewon's hand tighten protectively around hers. Father, Jaewon said, his voice carefully neutral. The older man stood before them, and for the first time, Ayana noticed how tired he looked. The hardness that usually defined his features seemed to have softened somehow. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then his father sighed deeply, the sound carrying years of regret. I was wrong, he said, his voice low but clear. I thought love would weaken you, that she would drag you down from everything you had achieved. But I can see now what I was too stubborn to see before. She has lifted you higher than I ever could. Ayana's eyes went wide. She had never expected to hear such words from this man. His father stepped closer, his gaze shifting to her face. His expression held something she had not seen before. Remorse. Ayana, he said, his voice gentler now, almost hesitant. I judged you unfairly. I looked at your background, your circumstances, your race, and I let prejudice blind me to who you really are. You have given my son something all my money and influence could never provide. Peace. Purpose. True happiness. For that, I owe you an apology. Tears spilled down Ayana's cheeks. She bowed deeply, her voice trembling with emotion. Sir, your acceptance means more than you can know. Thank you for giving us your blessing. Jaewon's father nodded, his own eyes glistening. He turned to his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. Take care of her, he said quietly. Love her well. And forgive an old man who took far too long to understand what matters most. For the first time in years, Jae-won embraced his father. It was brief but powerful, a moment of healing that closed old wounds and opened new possibilities. As they separated, Jae-won turned back to Ayana and wove his fingers through hers once more. His father gave them a small smile, then returned to his car and drove away, leaving behind a blessing that felt like sunlight after a long winter. Ayana leaned against Jae-won's shoulder as they walked home together. Love had not only broken through the walls around his heart. It had healed fractures in his family that had existed for years. And this time, there were no more rejections, no more barriers, no more walls. Only acceptance. Only understanding. Only love. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more beautiful stories like this one.